hello there, and welcome to another edition of Redleg Roundtable. For this edition, I am thrilled to bring on co-author of The Big 50, the minute moments that made the Cincinnati Reds, Chris Garber. Chris, thanks so much for joining me. You and Chad, it was a labor of love. I know the first time around, we're going to announce a little bit that actually the day this comes out on March 4th, your new edition will be available. So thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure, Seth. It's always good to be here. Want to represent real quick my Olentangy Liberty State champions.
All right, here you go.
T-shirt. You've got something behind you.
Yeah. Back-to-back Central Ohio games there.
It's a good Friday afternoon.
Yeah, it was fun. Like you're texting me saying that was not pass interference as I'm calling the game up in the press box, and then I get all the way back down to Columbus, and we go out to a pizza place, and we got the game on, and we're cheering on the Liberty folks. So it was kind of a full circle day of the respective schools, and I know the Liberty kids were out on the sideline as Watterson got ready to close that one out. So that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, it was a great experience for all of them.
Yeah, definitely really cool. A state championship in football in Ohio. It means a lot, especially Division I, but then also Watterson knocking over a two-time defending champ in Toledo Central Catholic. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I wanted to have you on, and Chad Dotson, very busy man, likely won't be joining us, but the two of you got together several years ago to put together a book, and now as we sit here several years later, the second edition's coming out, which it's got to be a bit of an honor, isn't it? That they took you back to the well.
Yeah, for sure. The first edition of the book came out in 2018, but it's in some ways it's a 20-year project right now.
Okay.
Chad and I, we had this idea in 2005 to write a book about the 50 greatest seasons in Reds history. And we did some preliminary work on it. We wrote a couple spec chapters, and we just didn't get a lot of interest from publishers at the time. I mean, this is long ago. I'm not even sure I was married yet. I lived in California. Chad might have not even been a judge yet, but we kind of threw it in the back of our minds. And then as Chad kind of built, Redleg Nation up into kind of a big thing and got kind of a bigger following for us, we picked it back up. And we had a couple publishers interested in it. And then one of them went out of business, right? So we were about to sign the contract. So eventually we ended up with Triumph Books probably 9 or 10 years ago. And they're probably the biggest sports publishing imprint in the country. Mm-hmm. They do tons and tons of biographies, autobiographies. They are really good. They put out when a team wins a championship, they get that book out, the next day.
Yeah, they do.
And so they have a series called The Big 50, which is not exactly the 50 greatest games, but it's the men and moments is what they call it, that make the teams, what's so special. So we hooked up with them, changed our concept just a little bit, gave us some more freedom actually about what to write about, and put that together for them, like I said, several years ago.
Remind some of us out here that have followed you guys for a while. How did you and Chad come across one another?
We met in the virtual sense back on Bill Lack is a famous Reds fan who used to run a listserv. So we're talking early days of the internet, free World Wide Web, more or less. It was an email list, and there were several dozen, I don't know, a few hundred Reds fans on that from all around the globe. And we would, hot stove league it in the winter, and in the daytime, in the season, it was almost like social media now, with almost like a running commentary, but it was just each one was a separate email you'd get from the list. And we did all kinds of really cool things, and the guys would meet up together at games and got to know each other in real life and made a lot of great friends that way. And for me, being, I think I might have started in law school, and definitely in California, it was like a lifeline to what fans were thinking. You could read the newspaper, but this was really getting in touch with other fans and having those conversations that you would have in person.
That's really cool. And I'm a little bit younger. I graduated high school in '97, went to Ohio State and enrolled in the fall of '97. And I always, when I've heard you guys talk about it or Bill Lack talk about what it was, I wish I would have discovered it because I didn't know anything about it.
It was crazy, man. I mean, there were some really smart dudes on there. It was kind of that early times of sabermetrics. So we were like reading Rob Nyer and Bill James and complaining about why the Reds didn't, take on. It was before Moneyball. Why didn't they think this way? Why didn't they have more sophistication and statistical analysis? And I think that the listserv had its own like Reds Hall of Fame. They were, the guys didn't like the way that the Reds ran their Hall of Fame. So we're like, we're going to create our own virtual Hall of Fame, and they would have votes every year. And I mean, it was really involved.
What years do you think this was?
I'd say the early 2000s.
See, okay. It flew above me, I guess. It wasn't below me, it was above me. I just didn't know about it. I wish I would have, because that sounds awesome. I think I've explained to you before, like, I remember the Cincinnati Post blog that C. Trent would start. Like, specifically, I remember actually visiting San Diego with my wife, and the first night we kind of took a while to like adjust to the time change. And I did it more than that, but I remember kind of sitting up in bed and following that blog as the game's going along because I couldn't watch the game.
Yeah.
And and there was some people on there that would be on Twitter later, and that we would know through Redleg Nation, or the Riverfront as it's known now.
Yeah. I think, Chad started Redleg Nation probably in, I'm going to say 04, 05, I think, right around that time. And that kind of replaced the listserv, kind of faded out when we had a little bit more of an immediate real-time, real-time conversations on the Redleg Nation, or the Redleg Nation, like game threads. And a lot of us were also active on Trent's comment section.
Yeah.
That was a real like sea change for how you could follow a team.
It was,
especially if you weren't like in the town, you weren't calling into talk radio or going to a sports bar with your buddies. It was a great replacement.
So I wanted to share this with you before we go any deeper in the book. Behind me, I often have my copy of the Big 50, and I bought two because of my grandfather. I bought one for him as well. And there was a deal going on. I think he had you come on with him, Chad did, on Redleg Nation Radio, it was called, before it was the Riverfront. And the deal was, if you bought a book, you guys would send baseball cards. So here's my note from you.
I love it.
Colonial Williamsburg stationery. And here's some baseball cards. It's been in my desk all this time.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We really wanted to do a lot more kind of promotional stuff like that. The cold hard truth of it is, a stamp would eat up a sizable portion of our royalties for every book we sold.
That's right.
It really wasn't too economical for us to do a whole lot of mail out promotion, but we did it a couple times. It was pretty fun.
And I kick myself to this day because the two of you came to, I don't know if it was there was something, the Ohio Book Fair or something like that here in Columbus, and the two of you were here. And my son was playing basketball that day, and it was kind of like one of those deals where I'm like, after this game, I'm going to go over there. And it's like, well, we're going to lunch. Oh, okay. And, the day gets away from you, and then I'm like, man, I could have gone to meet Chris and Chad, and I didn't.
Yeah, that was our last signing for that book. It was like spring of 2019, I think.
It might have been a full year later, yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to do it, and I kind of coerced Chad into driving all the way up to Columbus for it. And it was a cool event. I don't think we sold a ton of books that day. It really wasn't the deepest market for Reds literary fans,
not
compared to a couple of the others. Yeah, the Cincinnati Book Festival, I think they call it books on the banks or by the banks. That was a really, really big event. We sold a lot of books that day. So
the thing was, you did this, and I know you took some chapters. He took some chapters. Before we came on, I was joking with you that I would read the book and try to decipher which one of you wrote which chapters. But listen, I've known other folks. My good friend Jonathan Knight, he's written several books, mostly about Cleveland sports because that's what he cares about. And I know the research that goes into it. And boy, it takes time. And I know if you spread this out over as long as you did, but I know you got on deadlines and you probably had to really crack the whip a little bit. You're both lawyers by profession. You had different points in your careers. You had children. How did you manage it? Like, what was that like?
Well, I think I got kind of lucky because the age, we probably wrote the bulk of the book over about 9 months, I would say.
Okay.
Probably the bulk of the year 2014 was like the heavy duty writing. We've done a lot of like reading and researching, and then we kind of got down to the writing part for that kind of stretch there. The good thing was my kids at that time were like early elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd go to bed at 9 o'clock and pretty much stay there. And then I would go upstairs and write until, 12 or 1 almost every night. And it was, it was a great escape for me and it's fun, right? I mean, I like this stuff. I love learning about it. I loved all the reading. I loved all the kind of deep researching. We both would get completely sucked down rabbit holes on newspapers.com.
Uh-huh.
We'd go to look up an article about Frank Robinson getting arrested or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I know, I'm reading about some murder case in Cincinnati in 1958. And I'm like flipping through weeks worth of papers to find out how this case turns out. And I'm like, crap, there went an hour. I was supposed to be just checking on at a certain point. But yeah, it was a ton of fun. I mean, we read, gosh, I'd say we probably read every Reds book that's out there, at least at the time. Dug deep into like Sports Illustrated, Sporting News Archives, New York Times, you name it, we read it. And that was pretty, it was, like I said, it's pretty fun. I'm glad AI wasn't around back then because I might have been tempted to like use that to summarize some stuff. And I probably would have missed out on those little details, which is really what we tried to do is like the little details and the little stories that kind of fall through the cracks of history. It's not a trivia book, but there were a lot of little stories that we hadn't heard before that we tried to kind of bring to the forefront and make this a book that, a 10-year-old kid who's getting into baseball could read it and learn all they need to know about the Reds. But somebody who's, much older, who's followed the team for 30, 40 years could still find things in there that they didn't know. They'd relive some things they remembered and then get some new details or new characters they weren't that familiar with.
Well, we'll get to the one point you just raised in a second, but I wanted to ask you one pretty poignant question because I had you on the episode of Redleg Roundtable when we talked about how you became a fan, and you were one who really talked about admitting to me that you're kind of a know-it-all when it came to like your Reds knowledge as a young child. You were probably a good parlor trick for your parents at cocktail parties.
Yeah.
But did law school prepare you for what it would take to research this book, or did your zeal for all things Reds play a bigger part? What do you did they combine? Was one more of a factor?
Probably I probably wouldn't say law school as much as I would say like undergrad journalism school.
Yep.
I really, both of them a little bit, just like digging deep.
For research, yeah.
Yeah, the research aspect of it. And I will say the one thing about law school that is you get a feel when you're doing legal research after you have some experience for when you're done.
Mm-hmm. When
the well is pretty much dry and like continued digging is not going to add much value. And that was a skill that I think was helpful here. As much as I would get sidetracked and chase the shiny objects, I could tell, I'd read an interview. I'm like, okay, Joe Morgan said all this stuff 7 times in other interviews. I'm not going to get a whole lot more out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the Big 50 it comes out and certainly listen, it's got all the different chapters. The greatest World Series game ever played, 41-92, wire to wire. Johnny Bench says goodbye. Nasty Boys. Those were some of the chapters. Now, when I look at those ones and some others, those are like ones those are things that Reds fans of any weight at all know about that. So the thing I was impressed with, and part of your research speaks to this, you tried to make it into a story. You were telling a story that maybe from an angle we didn't know, or even if it was an angle we knew, maybe a fresh perspective of it. How intentional was that by you and Chad both?
Yeah, 100% intentional. Most people can sing these songs by heart, so we wanted to, add an instrument to it, or find the hidden verse that people hadn't heard before, and really, kind of, as I said, add some value to the people who know everything about the Reds, or just kind of tell the story in a different way. I mean, Chad did that a few places that I thought were just great, like the Tom Seaver no-hitter chapter. And then look, this is something that we learned writing it. Like a straight game recap, play by play, is really boring.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to sometimes put the guy on second base to tell how he scores, but you don't want to just go straight through a game log and type it in. That's not fun for anybody. So we tried to get inside the players' heads a little bit. It's something that I've tried to pick up from some of the best, sports writers and storytellers. Sometimes I'd have Vin Scully's voice in my head, just, the way he would tell a story, and not that we tried to like expressly copy him or would have succeeded if we did, but just, be a storyteller, not a fact spewer.
Well, and there's a time and place for things such as that. I mean, basically at different times over the last 2 decades, I've been a sports writer covering high school sports. And specifically, like in the fall, you get to regional cross country and state cross country. In the spring, you got track. But in the winter, you get swimming and wrestling both. And this past week, for a school I cover for the Spotlight newspaper here in town in Columbus, I wrote, probably 400 words just on compiling results of, and it's valuable because these kids accomplished a lot, but there's a time and place for it. And, in a book you're trying to sell, maybe isn't it?
100%. I mean, the day after game story is absolutely the place for that. You need, you didn't watch the game, you want to know what happened, but, 50 years, after the game, there's probably things that are more interesting than, Don Gullett got Rick Burleson to ground out the second in the third inning, so it's a balance. And, but we didn't want it to be just like dry facts on a page.
Sure. Do you remember the show Sports Night?
Yeah. The
Aaron
Sorkin ESPN-ish show.
Right. So what you just said made me think, remember Joshua Molina's character? I just looked it up. His name was Jeremy Goodwin. And they brought him in, and he had a baseball highlight package. And this was back in the 90s when, that was a huge deal. It was be like they would get like 2 minutes to do a highlight package instead of 30 seconds like now. And his was like 7 minutes long. And they're like, you can't put that bunt in the third inning in there. And it's just, I'll never forget the kid. And at the time, and then that was on the air, I was in broadcast journalism school. So it's like, yeah, I get it. You can't do that. So,
well, yeah. And I'll tell you a story about the first draft of the book. I think we had contracted to deliver like 75,000 words.
Okay.
And our first, I won't say first draft, but our first final, air quotes, final draft was like 118. and I ran the word count, and I texted Chad. I'm like, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Because we thought we got it, pretty lean.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 100, it was basically 40% more than it was supposed to be or something. So we cut it and we trimmed it, and we got all the extra words out. And then we lopped off a couple of stories that, had to go over the side.
Sure.
And we were at like 110.
Oh.
I was like, all right, the scalpel has done its work. Now it's time for the meat cleaver. And we went back, and I think we ended up getting the publisher to accept, I don't remember if it was 90 or 100,000 words. I mean, it was way more than they wanted or they asked for, but they got them for free. And so we cut some good stuff for sure. I think over the years, you've probably seen a lot of that stuff out, through Chad's column in the Cincinnati Magazine or on Redleg Nation website. Like we tried to make use of it because it was fun and it was decent content, but didn't all fit.
Yeah, I get it. So, but there were other stories that maybe someone, especially my age or younger, or your age and younger, that maybe didn't know, like understand as much about, like the Ragamuffin Reds in '61, the Jungle Cats in '39, and even there's a chapter called Forgotten Drama, 1972 in LCS. I mean, that's going to grab my attention right away. I want to find out what this is. You even wrote a chapter about the brawl between the Mets and the Reds, I believe, in '86, and the chapter's called Crazy, Crazy, Crazy.
Yeah.
That night was something else.
Do you remember that?
I do. So my thing is this. I didn't really start paying attention until '87, but there's this whole line of reasoning behind why I know about it, beginning with my buddy growing up. They'd moved around a lot, so we didn't see each other much, but he loved Darryl Strawberry, and I loved Eric Davis. And so he tells me about the brawl a year later. He's like 3 years older than me. And so a year later, he finds out I'm really into Eric Davis and the Reds and all this. And he's like, well, our two teams got in a big fight. Well, then when I got to Suburban News in '01, my editor, it turns out he was at the game in the camera well. And he had recorded the game on a VHS tape back home in Westerville where he lived. And so he brought the tape in one day, and this is before YouTube had it. I got to see the brawl and everything on his VHS tape in like 2003 or 4. So that was really cool.
But yeah, that game, I mean, I remember watching it. I feel like it was a weeknight. I was 13, and it was on TV, which wasn't, always the case. And I remember it just being bonkers, and I remember a couple specific things. Obviously, the fight. I remember Dave Parker dropping a ball in right field that would have ended the game early. But and I always knew we wanted to make that a chapter just because it was just so wild. And, you went on Retro Sheet or Baseball Reference and looked up the box score and you see all this stuff, but you're like, yeah, there's a lot going on. But then I found that game on YouTube and I watched it and I was like, holy crap, there's more.
Yeah.
Like every time I'm like, wait, there's more. I mean, there was literally a full moon. Like every single thing was going on. And you had, I think Marty and Joe did the game on TV.
So that was when actually I had Steve Fiziak on in one of my early episodes of this show. And I actually did all that research you're talking about, like with the YouTube and different reenactments or accounts online. And that was when they did where Fiziak would do it with Marty some, and then he would do an inning or two with Joe and back and forth. And I typed out quotes and read them to Steve Fiziak and got his reaction. It was like, that was really fun for me to go down that alley with him. Cause Steve was a longtime broadcaster. He did games for the Angels and the Royals, but his work with the Reds was kind of short-lived. But at the same time, that was a very meaningful moment. Plus, the way they did that with the radio guys coming into the TV booth, because Channel 5 had bought these rights to be able to do that.
Yep. Yeah, that was a fun one for sure. I don't know if any kid who reads that chapter now would actually believe it. I mean, it's just there was so much going on in that one game.
Well, the bizarre thing for me was years later, I was at a Dayton Dragons game, and this was when Mesoraco was on the team, and Jay Bruce would have already been gone. There's a handful of guys that we know that were on that team, and they had it happened over time throughout that game where there was guys taking somebody out at the shortstop and second baseman out at second. And I think it was the Iowa Cubs. They did it over and over. And we were in a suite with one of my wife's, the partners at her firm. And we're like, listen, I said that these umpires are not doing their job. This is going to get bad. And even one time they actually threw the ball at a guy, tried to like slide into him or something. And then later in the game, there was a play and this pitcher, and he ended up spending time in jail in Dayton. The brawl happens. He picks up the ball and he goes to throw it at the dugout, trying to hit like the catcher, I think, in the chest for the Dragons. And this Iowa Cubs pitcher throws a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. It goes over the dugout and strikes a guy in the chest in the stands. And they ended up having to they had to call the league president. They got Walt Jocketty involved, and I forget who the Cubs general manager was, because Jocketty didn't want pitchers playing in field positions in a single A game. And they ended up they threw guys out, but then they retroactively decided who was thrown out so they could finish the game. And I feel like we had my young son with us, and it was like, man, it's the 5th inning and it's 10:30. I mean, we got to go, and we're driving back to Columbus, right? So, but that game reminds me of that 86 game.
Yeah.
It was insane. But look it up. The Iowa Cubs pitcher ended up spending time in jail, and he had to go
check that out.
The whole thing is like a 20-year-old Dominican Republic native here in the state.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then the Whip's finest moment, I guess, do you recall from that, or even some of the new stuff we'll get to in a minute, do you recall kind of any stories that weren't like maybe mainstream that you could tell? Like, what were some of your favorite things like that?
Yeah. The one I love, and I've told this one before, was the 1940 World Series.
Mm-hmm.
And the Reds, Ernie Lombardi had been hurt for most of that season. He was the star catcher on the team, one of the best hitters. And earlier in that season, the backup catcher, Willard Hirschberger, took his own life after a game. And the Reds were they were out of catchers. Like, they just didn't have people. They brought up a rookie, and he hit like 105 or something in a few weeks. And so they had a guy who was a coach for the Reds named Jimmy Wilson, who was a former big league catcher. I think he'd actually managed the Phillies like in the early 30s, maybe a player manager. He's the guy. He is the guy who converted Bucky Walters into being a pitcher.
Oh,
when he was the manager of the Phillies. Anyway, Jimmy Wilson comes out of retirement in September.
Wow.
And I think he was like 40 already. And for a catcher, other than a couple guys, that's like 60. And he ends up catching the Reds like a lot of games down the stretch. And in the World Series, he ended up, I think he caught 2 or 3 games, and he even stole a base. Yeah, he played 6 of the 7 World Series games, batted .353, and stole a base, while completely just being like the next thing up from a guy off the street. And never played again, retired. I think he went to Chicago to manage the Cubs after that, and he died pretty young. But the Jimmy Wilson stuff, I couldn't get enough of Jimmy Wilson.
Sounds like the NHL goal. I don't know if they do this, but they have these goalies that'll basically, they're on standby. They're like, local rec players. Like, if we need a goal, we're not going to not play the game tonight.
Yeah, didn't they used one of those 3 or 4 years ago, I think.
Yeah, in
like they're on reserve for either team.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like if one team has both goalies go down, they give this guy a sweater and push him out on the ice.
I mean, you see it in golf where if the tee times are uneven, they'll have us even at the Masters. It's happened where like a local pro or like a club pro type guy will play with them just to keep the pace. But that's way different than being a hockey goalie or a catcher. That's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
All right, so the new edition, it's coming out, as we said, basically today, as people are listening or watching this. It's the second edition, so it's not a whole new book. It's not a sequel, but there are some changes, some things that have been gone. Go ahead and tell me maybe a few of the highlights on that, and we don't want to go too deep. We want people to read.
Yeah, I don't give it away. Yeah. So basically, we'd sold out all the books that were printed in the first, couple runs of the book. And we got in touch with the publisher and said, hey, what's the deal? Print some more. And they said, well, we're switching up some of the design things. Like I said earlier, it's a series. There's big 50s for, Detroit Red Wings and Kansas City Chiefs and a lot of different organizations and teams. And they're like, well, we're switching some things up. Would you guys mind updating the book? And, and we said, we'd be happy to. The only problem is there hasn't been a whole lot of great moments in Reds history since the book came out. What do you want here? We were able to wedge the Scooter Gennett 4 home run game into the book right before it went out the last time. But they said, well, give it some thought. And fortunately for us, the 2023 season happened. we had some ideas. We had some stuff that didn't make it before, and we thought, yeah, we should have spent more time on this, or we'd like to tell that story. But then the 2023 team came around, and we're like, oh, this is great. Like, this is the best thing that's happened here, at least in 10 years, right? And so we're like, well, those guys got to be in the book. And we reworked a few things. So like we had a chapter on Aroldis Chapman before, and that's, probably didn't age quite as well as being a Reds legend.
Yeah.
So what we did is we took the Chapman stuff and we did some research on all the other dudes in the Reds history who threw 100 miles an hour or were supposed to have thrown 100 miles an hour, where they raced a motorcycle or something. And so we did that research and we put that chapter in there, and it's really interesting. You learn a lot more about Jim Maloney for one, and a few other guys, and then obviously Hunter Green. And those stats are probably as outdated from the moment we wrote them down as far as how many 100-mile-an-hour pitches are being thrown every day. But the Reds do have like a pretty long history of fireballing, pitchers. So that was cool. We took another chapter on, we wanted to get, Jonathan India had won the Rookie of the Year, in the time between the issues of the book. And I don't know if Jonathan India himself is worth a chapter, but what about Rookies of the Year and almost Rookies of the Year? Great rookie seasons for the Reds. So we made a chapter on that, which I think was a lot of fun to read about. And you got to touch on some guys who turned into real stars and other guys who won a Rookie of the Year. And, Scott Williamson, for example, who had a cool career, but wasn't, an all-time great who would make it into a book like this, just on his own chapter. So
Giovanni,
that was another one.
Giovanni Soto robbed Joe Votto, by the way.
Yes, he did.
That was.
And I did have the pleasure of updating. We got to, we went through and we updated all the stats and things like that. So we got to put some more Joey Votto numbers in there. Sadly, we were able to kind of close the book on Votto.
Yeah.
Right before our manuscript was due, it was clear that Joey was done. So we were able to kind of put those in ink once and for all. And the other great thing about this book that I want to share is we've got an updated foreword.
Yeah.
Chris Welsh was good enough to agree to write a new foreword for the book, and it's awesome. I don't know if I would say it's worth the whole price of the book, but it's got to be pretty close.
That's nice.
Because Chris grew up in Cincinnati. He's got an incredible history with the organization, with the team. Firsthand perspective on the Big Red Machine World Series era when he was, in high school and college and his own experience with that. He tells those stories really well. And he sent his draft to us and we're like, oh my gosh, this is great. This is it's the best thing in the book. So
awesome.
It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, he came on with me last December and I was thrilled. He was really good, to talk to and get his take on a lot of things and just his perspective. Cause those guys that play, you think about the fact that they grew up, especially I guess the guys that played who grew up here too. He grew up here. So he's got that fan perspective in him, just like any of us. Right. And then he was good enough to make it happen. And he actually wore the Reds uniform. So that's just, and now all these years, I mean, he's been the TV analyst, since 1990, mid 90s anyway.
Yeah. Early. Yeah. I would say at least early mid 90s.
He and George got together. I forget now, but
I think so. Yeah.
That's a long time. And
yeah, for sure.
And, Marty and Joe are the gold standard when it comes to that, but certainly on the television side and George Grand himself, I've texted with George and hopefully I might be able to talk to him soon. So that'd be fun.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Chris has been the TV in the TV booth since 1993.
Yeah. Yeah. So the old sports channel, they called it.
That's right.
Sports channel.
Yeah. He tells a story. He was in college in Tampa.
Yeah.
And him and a couple of his teammates drove through the night to make it to the 1975 World Series.
It's amazing. And they sat pretty low, I think, if I remember right. So I guess
I think they snuck down a little bit.
Yeah. how interesting was it to kind of open up the work, like all that labor you put into it over that longer period of time, maybe, and now you're getting to kind of take another look over it. What was that experience like for you and Chad? And I guess was it pretty rewarding to kind of see it all, or were you kind of like, oh man, I can't believe we did that?
Yeah, it was great. It was funny when we went back. We opened the book from scratch and started going through and saying, hey, is there anything we didn't like the way we did it? Is there anything we want to change? And we both texted each other like, this is a pretty good book, man. We're really happy with it. The sales were good. I mean, they sold all they made, but for us, obviously we're not going to make any money on it. Real money. It's just, I'm just glad that it's all there and the stories are there for people to read. And we're pretty proud of it.
I guess last thing I'd ask you about the book, what kind of feedback did you get? Did you hear from any prominent folks, maybe of the guys you wrote about? Did you hear from anybody with the Reds? Like, what was the feedback?
I didn't. Chad might have gotten that. Like I said, Chad's kind of the more the face guy. So he probably did hear from some people. The feedback we heard was great when we would go to signings and stuff like that. What's fun about it is everyone just shares their memories. Mm-hmm. Everybody has the thing that they did, and it's usually with family. It's either a story about their grandpa or their grandma or their dad or their mom or their kids. And they talk about something in the book that really resonated with them, that they remembered. And it's just, it's a good time to, it's just good memories for everybody to brings back. We didn't include things, the March shot's not in the book. Mm-hmm. Pete Rose's good moments are in there. The bad ones aren't. And that was kind of a conscious choice.
Yeah.
We're not shying away from that stuff. We're not afraid of it, but this is supposed to be kind of a celebration and a way to tap into all the good times.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I guess that's kind of, you and I talked just after Pete's passing. I had you on to talk to talk about your fanhood, and it came up at that point. It's just kind of, you want to remember the good times when you're just trying to be a baseball fan. I mean, there's a reason why sports is sports, and it's an escape kind of, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
I get it.
We need it now, man, as more than any time, I think. Try to keep it as kind of pure as we can.
That's right. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what, I guess I'll get you out of here on this, though, as far as our conversation tonight. We don't really do a lot of current things. As I'm recording with you, the Reds are on my television. What are your thoughts heading into this season? Are you pretty excited? Are you still bothered by your lack of watchability as far as you're not having cable and things like that? Or what's the plan?
Well, the plan, so, last year we didn't have cable, and I probably watched less than a half dozen games all year long. And that was weird, man, because either listening or watching, I was probably over 100 every year for the last 40, 45. I don't know. But I'm back. I'm going to subscribe to the new streaming package. I'm excited about that. I may have to fight my, wife and kid who are evil Cub fans for the TV.
Yeah.
But we got enough TVs around the house. So I'm guarded. I'm still guarded. I've been wounded a lot over the last 10 years, but there's some fun players. There's some exciting players, and they have a chance to really contend. Still wish they'd added another outfielder, but they weren't going to do that. So we'll live with it.
That's kind of the conceit of the whole thing at this point is, there's people who will probably always cheer the moves they make as if they're just the best thing ever. And then there's people that maybe aren't happy. I guess we just kind of have become understanding that, they're not going to add the premium free agent, or they're likely not to make the trade for the premium bat. And I guess we just have to deal with that. I just saw Gavin Lux make a throw from third base to first base. So,
hey,
he can get it there. I'm not saying it was a laser.
I mean, he's got to be able to do that, right?
you would think, and there's a difference between like, are you going to play all 162 games over there? Or are you going to give me 30 games there because we don't have anywhere else to put you really, so we're going to be moving you around. I think if it's more the latter, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I mean, there's Ryan Friel played some third base, I believe, at some point. Like, it is what it is. Nice little short hop scoop that he had about 20 feet behind the bag too. So it was okay. It was okay. But it's just this whole idea of like, if Ellie's your shortstop and McLean's your second baseman, and we're going to build that foundation on those two rocks, then the first and third are a little scary for me as well as the outfield.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but I'm feeling good. I'm gonna, I'm definitely giving them. I'm open minded. I'm gonna give them a shot, and hopefully we'll all be entertained and be watching baseball all the way through October.
And honestly, I feel a little about this season like I did 2021 Bengals when we entered the season, and certainly that resulted in a Super Bowl appearance. But Joe's coming off that injury and everything like that, and you've got several pitchers and even infielders coming off of injuries for the Reds. I feel like if you could just make me love watching again, like, and it's not even I'm gonna drop a name here, but when I interned at the Fan when I was in college, Kirk Herbstreit hosted a show. And he started doing this back then, and he still does it today, like on social media. He'll be like, "Oh, the Reds couldn't even get me to the Kentucky Derby," or, "The Reds couldn't even get me to this," or the years what they would wilt in September. He'd be like, "Well, the Reds got me to college football," and then, and I don't want to be that guy, but at the same time, there's a difference between like watching those games in September when they have no chance, and if you win 85 games and you just miss out, at least it was watchable,
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2023, it was fine with me.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, because they were fun to watch, and they were exciting. I mean, the reality is, unless they've just got a garbage roster, which they don't have a garbage roster, the only reason they're not going to be contending at all is if guys get hurt. Key guys get hurt. And if key guys get hurt, like, they're not any fun to watch, right? I mean, you don't want to watch these guys when McLean and Ellie aren't playing.
Sure.
So, it's kind of like the part about watchability and success they go hand in hand, but they're not like, maybe not the way that like Herbstreit was thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, the Big 50 second edition comes out. It's available now. Even if you get this, I'm gonna put this right on the audio platform. So even if people download this on March 3rd, you can still pre-order it on Amazon. I already checked. It's available on there. Where's the best place for you as the author, as someone who might get a few pennies on the dollar from this venture? Where's the best place for people to buy? Do you care?
No, I don't care. It doesn't really make much difference. I don't think. Somehow I think we get a better deal on the Kindle books, but I don't think this is a Kindle book. I think this is one you want to have in the house and be able to flip through it and read it out of order if you want. So, no, whatever is easiest, support your local bookstores, I think, if you can. I always would say that, but it doesn't make any difference to me one way or the other.
When the paper stock it's on, it was the original. I assume it's the same with this one. It's kind of on a magazine almost paper and color photo. So that was nice.
Yeah, well, this one's black and white. So that was one of the big changes they made, was to go black and white on the inside. I think the printing costs were just really high. I mean, it was a really high quality book. I haven't got my copies yet. So they usually send us a box.
Yeah.
And I emailed them today. I'm like, hey guys, where's those boxes? But so it's
usually with book review, they offer to give me to screen a copy.
I know. And those aren't out yet either. So I'm a little less stressed about it than I would have been. Way more wound up for the first edition. This one, I'm like, oh, it'll get here when it gets here.
It's like kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, if you didn't get a copy of the first one, definitely go out and check this out. And if you got it and you want to hear, a few more stories and get the very latest information and some new pictures, go grab it. Go grab another copy. Hand down the old one.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking some time tonight. I know you're a busy man, but I always appreciate chatting with you, and definitely looking forward to checking out the book, and hopefully everybody out there can do as well. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. Always a pleasure.
All right, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating and a review. Give us a follow on all the platforms, and certainly a like and maybe even a comment on YouTube would be great as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will have on the riverfront later this week, we will have Welcome to the Jungle, where we have to talk about T. Higgins being tagged officially and we'll figure out whether they're going to kick the can down the road some more, if they're actually going to try to sign him. And then also later this week, the Riverfront Reds show. I believe Tim Daniel will be hosting that one. So can't wait to check that one out as well. Chris, thanks again. And so long, everybody. Have a great night.